Welcome to another live reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. The authors are Monica Shu. Swear I hope I'm not butchering her name, and Barbara Moore. So excited about this evening's where we're picking up from. We had started last week, um, the chapter The Dark of the Moon and Moon Blood. It was quite a lengthy chapter, so I did have to stop within the middle of that chapter, which I don't really like to do. But the format, as usual, is one where you can just mute yourself. You don't have to have your cameras on. You can wash dishes or what have you, whatever you want to do. You can treat it as an audio book. So for the first hour and let's say 45 minutes, I'm going to be reading straight through. As we see, this is a nice thick book, and so I really want to get through it in a decent amount of time. So I'm going to be reading for the first hour 45, maybe hour 50, especially sometimes it gets really good. And then we'll save a little bit of time for comments, reactions, questions, thoughts, things like that. This time I'm so excited. I might have to stop and just like underline some stuff or, make some notes. So just bear with me if I have to do that because it's amazing. All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. We're picking up from page 182. At the same time, male metallurgists were introducing a technology aimed at altering the natural powers and channels of the earth's spirit. At the same time, male metallurgists were introducing a technology aimed at altering the natural powers and channels of the earth's spirit. Hey, Alicia. Thanks for joining us. I'm gonna keep going right at it. You can stay on mute. Just treat this as an audio book. We leave the last 15 minutes of our reading open for comments, questions, reactions at that time. So from now until then, hey, we're gonna just keep going with the reading. Okay? So, metallurgy detached from the goddess and was no longer a sacred art. It was being used to mass produce offensive war weaponry, the war machines of large bands of highly organized men who were inventing the profession of conquest and plunder, the profession of imperialistic power, armed with rolling metal. This was a patriarchal shift. The Furies cried. He made man's way across the place of the ways of the goddess and blighted age old distributions of power. Male priesthoods made the shift by concentrating more and more on the negative goddess. Once her devotees, they expressed increasingly obsessive fears of the sexual and death dealing powers of the Great Mother. They did not, as women priestesses had always done, identify with the dark side. The Great Mother had always had her dark aspect, for this is the truth of the universe. And her priestesses resolved it through ritual expression of fury. Under Bronze Age priesthoods, this aspect was projected morbidly and exploitatively emphasized and unrelieved. No longer simultaneously experiencing the luminous benevolence, beauty, and righteousness of the mother's natural world, the male priests began to rule by fear alone: fear of death, fear of female sexuality, fear of natural process. Thus, Kali, the Hindu great mother, became dark, all devouring time. That was in quotes. She became just simply dark and all devouring time. She was depicted as the bone wreathed lady of the place of skulls, smeared with ashes, squatting among jackals and bats in the burial grounds. Served in bloody rites, Kali had many names. All of them were negative. All bad times in the human cycle are named for her, like the Kali Yuga, which they say we just came out of. Statues show her crouching in a halo of flames, devouring the entrails of her mate, Shiva, the guts strung from the corpse to her mouth like an umbilical cord. Kali's temple in India functions as the people's slaughterhouse. The people take the meat and the blood is left to her. Okay, now I just want to stop because, again, a lot of this stuff is metaphysical, but I do want to say this. The pictures that you may see, if anybody were to Google Kali, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see blood coming out of her mouth. You're going to see her holding, she has skulls along her neck. She's standing on a man, they call that's Shiva, who's supposed to be her mate, and she has like one foot on him, and she's holding a head, and there's blood. And so people are like, see, this is the evil, dark, devouring female goddess. No. So what you're seeing is, I'm not going to give all of it because I'm supposed to be reading, but just on a metaphysical level, understand that Kali represents the when you see the heads cut off, that is the death of the ego. And that we're going to have many ego deaths. You don't just kill your ego one time. Just keep that in mind. So it's, again, these are metaphysical things that we're seeing and hearing. And then now when they're talking about Kali's temple in India functions as the people's slaughterhouse, the people take the meat and the blood is left to her. Now, male, even to this day, I was just reading about this, that men run the whole, it's a goddess. How is it there are no priestesses? But anyway, the men do things with feces and blood, and but that was not us. That's the patriarchy has taken it over and profaned it. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. It's become profane. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. All right, so everyone has seen this Kali, the Black Mother. She dances on Shiva's dead body, wearing a necklace of hacked off human hands. Like I just said, her tongue rolled grotesquely out to lap up human blood from the ground. All creation is the sport of my mad mother Kali, said the Hindu poet Ram Prasad. She also has her benevolent aspect, but the functions become increasingly severed. Meaning, she was good, or not just good, but there's a whole other loving, beautiful, loving side to Kali, but that's like chopped up. They don't show that. Paradox is split into dualism, an act characteristic of patriarchal consciousness. No doubt, as men engaged more and more in wanton slaughter of their own kind for plunder and power, the more they needed to project this split in their own psyches onto the goddess. The benevolent Kali becomes virtually a separate pale goddess, a passive mother, a sex partner without power. At her best, she is the divine Shakti, the creative energy of the male god, coming into manifestation at the moment of sexual union with Shiva. The Bronze Age Kali is split into the death goddess or the sex goddess or the mother goddess, but is no longer the one cosmic process containing all aspects and polarities. And it is only as the terrible destroyer, time, that she has any authority or power left. Hair has always been connected with the idea of cosmic power. Hair is electric, radiating energy, a symbol of vitality and spiritual illumination. Witches believed that their magic power was in their hair. During the European witch hunts, the first thing the church did to capture witches was to shave them from head to foot, thus driving out the devil power that lived in their body hair. American Indians have fought hair clipping missionaries for centuries. To mourn a dead person, the hair was cut, signifying a life offering to death. With the increase of urban priesthoods and the unbalanced obsession with the death aspect of the Great Mother, the more we find symbolic connections occurring between death, the shaving of the head, sacrifice, and castration. The priests of Isis had bald heads, and still today we have tonsured monks, shorn nuns, and the Christian notion that a woman's hair is a seductive. Wait. I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm acting up today, y'all. I don't know. Let me say it again. Okay. American Indians have fought hair clipping missionaries for centuries. To mourn a dead person, the hair was cut, signifying a life offering to death. With the increase of urban priesthoods and the unbalanced obsession with the death aspect of the Great Mother, the more we find symbolic connections occurring between death, the shaving of the head, sacrifice, and castration. The priests of Isis had bald heads, and still today we have tonsured monks, shorn nuns, and the Christian notion that a woman's hair is a seductive, witchy insult to God and must be covered in his church. And thus, traditional Jewish brides cut off their long, glorious hair, sacrificing original female power to be subordinate to a male in marriage. Among the Greeks, the goddess of the dark moon was Hecate. Oh, I think some pronounce that Agade. Agade. That reminds me of Sabrina, the teenage witch, and they talked about the three, the maid, the virgin, the maiden, and the crone. Anyway, Sabrina was a good one, for looking at things metaphysically. But anyway, they talked about Acady on Sabrina, the teenage witch on Netflix. Okay, but so among the Greeks, the goddess of the dark moon was Acady. She was queen of ghosts and of the crossroads where many midnight rituals took place. Acady was the destroyer. Newborn children and animals were sacrificed to her. She was the giver of rain as well as harvest storms. Her major festival was celebrated on August 13th. In one Acady legend, the mother, in her terrible aspect, takes the form of a bear or boar, killing her own son/lover. But as the new moon, she restores him to new life. Dark Diana of the Romans, goddess of the witches, wore a necklace of testicles echoing the castration nature of Kali. And the Gorgon Medusa, her magic hair composed of writhing snakes, petrified all who looked at her into rigidity and death into stone. Thus, many of the primal aspects of the cosmic mother were turned into aspects of the enemy. And again, I know I'm supposed to just be reading, but I feel that I had just done some research to let it out tonight. And so I am going to say again, a lot of this stuff is it has the metaphysical aspect. Every time they talk about Medusa and she looks at somebody and they turn into stone. I just want to say that of course the snakes in the head was her hair, was her locks, number 1, and number 2, as a guru, she was able to initiate Shakti into others through various ways, one of them by looking into her initiate's eyes. And as she's looking into their eyes, she's activating their chakras within them. She's performing a work that causes that kundalini energy that we all have. Is some energy that sits at the base of our spine, and she's activating each chakra until there's illumination, enlightenment, where the kundalini reaches that the crown. Now the thing is, if you're not ready, or it was some I read just earlier about frequency. If your frequency is too low, you haven't done the correct work, you haven't healed, you haven't been doing that sort of work, and your frequency is too low. Your pineal is already calcified, or halfway calcified. So the reverse could happen, whereas the kundalini is raised with her initiation, the pineal gland becomes calcified even more, like a stone, like a rock. So again, there's so much metaphysical, there's that back. I just want you to understand that when we're reading certain things, there is always um, the underlying aspect, the underlying scientific or metaphysical aspect to what is being said. Okay. All right. So we just read about Medusa and her hair, and that thus many of the primal aspects of the cosmic mother were turned into aspects of the enemy. But from the beginning and even far into patriarchal times, the dark of the moon symbolized divination, illumination, and the powers of healing. Soma, the mind expanding potion, was the dark fruit of the moon tree. It opened the gaping depths of darkness from which magic incantation rises up. Darkness is the time of tactility and of the voice. So the dark goddess or dark moon presided over love magic, metamorphosis, wonder working, and medicinal healing. Her sexual aspect was not separated from these other powers until the solidification of the patriarchy. Only then was she fragmented and reduced to simply a sex goddess or the wife. The Neolithic Near Eastern goddesses Isis, Astarte, Ashtoreth, Ishtar, Artemis, and Diana all have their dark nature, one half of the cosmic process. In that aspect, they were imaged as half snake or half fish. To men who were and are in opposition to her ever changing cyclic nature, she appears dreadful, hostile, arbitrarily destructive, moody, negative, the yawning mouth of the womb tomb, as abysmally prolific with children and with death, threatening castration coming and going. During the Neolithic age, men who saw the dark moon goddess in a dream had to put on women's clothes and give themselves to other men. The dream image was a message that they needed rebalancing. To women and men in accord with her nature, she gives magic power and cosmic insight into the life process, forever revolving from light into dark and back again. From earliest Stone Age times, the process of birth was the prototype for the process of spiritual rebirth or higher birth into the heavens as an immortal or star. But with increasing male domination of religious ideas and the priestly projection of hostile fears onto the great goddess, this higher birth was seen increasingly as a breakaway from the mother. The first birth was into mere flesh, but the second was into manhood, a state of non material immortality uncontaminated by the female process. At this point, the spirit begins to be defined as everything that is not earth, that is not nature, that is not female, i.e., it becomes an exclusive possession of males, as elitist as it is abstract. In the early small kin group structures, the custom of exogamy had led women to take mates from outside the mother clan. So the childbearing women were always the cohesive group within the community. Their mates tended to be visitors, blood strangers to the matrifocal group. Among the matriarchal Hopi, where the women propose marriage to men, in parentheses, the husband moves into the woman's home, which she inherits from her mother. But he spends most of his time at his mother's home, where he is blood related. The same customs were found throughout pre colonial Africa and no doubt existed among all our European pagan ancestors. To gain some cohesion and sense of participation, these outside males bonded together in rituals in which they imitated female processes. As Bruno Bettelheim writes in Symbolic Wounds, it is probable that all men's initiation rites were originally based on men's desire to imitate, to participate in women's menstruation and childbirth, which were overwhelming magic events. Magic because of their periodicity as well as their blood power. Australian Aboriginal males cut wounds in their penises, inserting stones to keep the womb permanently open. This rite imitates female bleeding, and the wound is called in their language a vagina. During this rite, young men pass through the legs of older men, being, quote, reborn, unquote, from the, quote, male womb, unquote. Nowhere can we find any rites or mysteries in which women have tried to imitate a male process or function. Nowhere. Nowhere can we find any rites or mysteries in which women have tried to imitate a male process or function. This alone tells us about the source of original mana or power. All blood, no, just the looks. All blood rituals derive the female blood of menstruation. Oh, I'm sorry. All blood rituals derive from the female blood of menstruation and childbirth. This is why in the Bible, Jehovah's covenant with Abraham was ritually sealed with the lifeblood of Abraham. And this covenant is kept by circumcising the foreskin of every Hebraic male infant. The Hebrews, like everyone else, were originally goddess worshippers, and it was her magic blood that symbolically sealed covenants. As the patriarchy solidified its power, however, many of the blood ritual imitations of women's functions were turned into taboos against women's functions, taboos of avoidance and hygiene. As the biblical Old Testament illustrates, patriarchal society places heavy taboos and penalties of the shame on menstruation and on women during and after childbirth. Such taboos were originally restrictions made by women themselves, menstrual hut customs, to protect their bodies and guarantee their sacred solitude during the moon functions. That's the reason for their separateness from men and children. But as male power structures and religious reactions against the goddess rise, seeing the great mother more and more as the castrating other, the terrible devourer, these moon blood taboos started to be given negative connotations. Women during their menstrual periods and childbirth are defined as unclean and dangerous, especially threatening to social manhood and its co opted assumptions of sacred wounds and higher powers gained through the second ritual birth via an elder male body. The female body, which actually does these things, becomes an embarrassing threat to the male's metaphorical assumption of the blood powers of menstruation and childbirth. No male priest can compete with a woman in these areas. Okay, okay. So, the menstruating woman is often totally excluded from group life, cast out into the bush or forest to fend for herself. She must be ritually cleansed before she can return to the tribe. Women in labor also must be secluded to protect men from contamination and must undergo periods of purification following childbirth. Among biblical Hebrews, a longer period following the birth of a daughter, of course, than a son. What was once seen among original humans as sacred and magically powerful to the whole kin group or tribe becomes under male religion impure, filthy, dangerous, negative, and evil. The source of life, female. Oh, I'm just saying that. That's when we're the cleanest. All right, Alicia, I see that. The source of life, female, is redefined and now hated as the enemy of male life. Let me say that again. The source of life, which is female, has been redefined and now hated as the enemy of life. We're not, yes. What was once woman's power is now hated as the enemy of male life. What was once woman's power, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, guys. The source of life is redefined and now hated as the enemy of male life. What was once woman's power is now to be woman's curse, woman's shame, woman's estrangement from God. In the Bible, we can see the original or Orwellian newspeak occurring in which false male imitations of menstruation and childbirth. In parentheses, they say that false imitation is the circumcision of the foreskin and the wounds of Christ. Okay. But so yeah, in which false male imitations of menstruation and childbirth are made sacred and holy, while the real thing by women is made filthy, sinful, and bestial. Say that again. In the Bible, I said I might have to underline some stuff, y'all, this time around, because I'm gonna have to go and do some more digging. In the Bible, we can see the original Aurelian newspeak occurring in which false male imitations of menstruation and childbirth, again, we're talking about the circumcision of the foreskin and the wounds of Christ, they are made sacred and holy. While the real thing done by women is made filthy, sinful, and bestial. This terrible and unnatural split in the human psyche is still with us, of course. Patriarchal religions are based on it. Under patriarchy, this split was projected everywhere into the cosmic spiritual realms, into human culture and customs, into scientific perception of the mental and physical worlds. Under Bronze Age urban priesthoods, the terrible mother was worshipped more and more with painful rites and punitive exorcisms. She became, in fact, the debased flesh, which must be flailed and disciplined into submission, a religious practice that served very well as rationalization for mass exploitation of human slave labor by the growing urban states and their ruling elites. If human flesh and blood is nothing but, then by all means use it. With the devaluation of the Great Mother's female bleeding came the debasement and exploitation of human life itself. Women's menstrual blood always was, always is, of the essence of the creative power of the Great Mother. Blood is the physical counterpart of the mystical life force, spiraling throughout the cosmos, nourishing the universe, sustaining its breathing in and out, its manifestations and dissolutions. Ancient women withdrew during their menstrual periods to meditate, fast, pray, and communicate with her. Women living together in cooperative groups do begin to coordinate the time of their periods. Ancient women bled and meditated together under the bleeding and meditating moon. Even under the punitive taboos of patriarchy, women withdrew to their menstrual huts and with some feeling of voluntary seclusion, a chance to get back in contact with their own nature for a few days each month, apart from the demands of children and men. In Women's Mysteries, Ancient and Modern, Esther Harding suggests that one of the prime causes of neurosis, illness, depression, and pain suffered by many women in modern cultures during our menstrual periods, which is the pre and then dash the premenstrual syndrome, especially as it's known today, is that we now have no menstrual ceremony of any kind. Menstruation is just each woman's private affliction or annoyance. It has no positive value or function, but no, mine does now for the past 3 years. I definitely, but I remember these days. I remember these days where it was more like a private affliction or an annoyance as opposed to it having like a positive value or function. We cannot withdraw into contemporary menstrual huts to listen to our bodies, minds, and needs, to establish contact with our cyclic and primal cosmic selves, to experience ourselves as sacred animals. And ironically, while being deprived of ritual solitude while we bleed, we are also isolated from the communion of other women who are bleeding. Each woman must go through each life stage, transition, and crisis in silent aloneness, unsupported by either ritual or the women's group. And that shouldn't be, right? That shouldn't be. That shouldn't be. This combination of meaningless isolation and lack of ritual solitude is the final patriarchal taboo against women, a major cause of mental illness and a major barrier against self realization. Thus, was women's ancient collective power broken. Women under patriarchy, isolated from each other and from themselves, could no longer threaten male dominance of life or question male co optation and imitation of our original female processes. But some faint traces of the ancient beliefs and practices remain, even in the modern world, even if in sometimes grotesque form. A continuing belief in the potency of women's menstrual blood is ritualized in tantric yoga. A man can only reach the ultimate tantric goal by having intercourse with a woman power holder at the time of her menstruation. This is when her red energy is most magically potent and intense. And among American motorcycle gangs like the Hells Angels, a male cannot become a full member until he performs the blood rite of cunnilingus. I never get that word right, but I know what they saying. A male cannot become a full member until, he goes down and performs the blood rite with his woman during her menstrual period. This is how he proves his macho toughness to the other males. He probably doesn't know that he is worshiping the Great Mother. For from Yes, baby. Yes. From hidden dirty secret to symbol of the life power. Wait a minute. Let me From hidden dirty secret to symbol of the life power of the goddess, women's blood has come full circle. Until recently, there have been no books on the psychology of menstruation, the rhythms and cyclicity of our women lives. In the 1970s, however, two such books were published: Female Cycles by Paula Weidiger in 1975, and The Wise Wound, Menstruation and Every Woman by Penelope Shuttle and Peter Redgrove in 78. Paula Weiger is an American feminist health worker and holds an advanced degree in psychology. Penelope Shuttle and Peter Redgrove are British poets influenced by Jungian psychoanalysis. They came to write their book as a result of Penelope Shuttle's own severe premenstrual depressions and her menstrual pains, and her attempts at finding their reasons and cure through in depth dream analysis. The two books complement each other. The Wise Wound is poetic and religious, while Female Cycles is more medical and immediately practical. Together, they chronicle the atrocious violence done to us women in societies ruled over and defined by wombless men who do not experience the lunar cyclic rhythms in their bodies. The Wise Wound shows how the human female's menstrual cycle was the critical evolutionary advance that initiated human society and culture. As we said in the first section, the fact that the human female is freed from the estrous cycle of other primates means that in woman sexuality is distinguishable from, separable from fertility. In woman alone among all the creatures on the earth, this shifting of sexual hormonal action led to increased alertness of the brain and its electrical activity, i.e., women have sexual energy at our disposal separable from reproductive energy. For woman, biology is not destiny in the narrow reproductive sense, even if patriarchy has tried through the dogmatic suppression of our autonomous sexuality to reverse this evolution. In parentheses, they say patriarchal religion is, in this sense, a primate religion, trying to pull the human female back from her evolutionary advance over other primates. For in this one aspect alone does human sexuality differ from primate sexuality. And it is for this subliminal reason that all hardcore patriarchal fundamentalists oppose evolutionary theory so vehemently. Because the Godhead of human evolution, its trigger, its energy source is and only can be female. The end of the parentheses. The sole function The sole function of the clitoris is sexual pleasure, baby. The sole function of the clitoris is sexual pleasure, and it is the only organ in the human body devoted to pleasure alone. Again, parentheses, the penis carrying both reproductive semen and sexual response in every erotic act. Okay, so let me make sure, let's the sole function of the clitoris is sexual pleasure, and it is the only organ in the human body devoted to pleasure alone. And in parentheses, we're saying that we know that the penis is an elongated clitoris, right? And so they're saying that it's the penis carrying both reproductive semen and sexual response in every erotic act. Okay. This means that women's sexual capacity is enormously enhanced and multiple, and it is present in us from birth to death. Clitoral sensation being determined neither by puberty nor menopause. When freed, women's autonomous sexual capacity is a great source of psychic, productive, creative, and magical powers. It was at the origins of human culture, and it is necessary to any further human evolutionary advance. Human life and evolution are explained in many ways. We are indeed producers and tool makers, as the Marxists and anthropologists say, and creators of symbolic culture. But we were not human until the appearance. Human life and evolution are explained in many ways. We are indeed producers and tool makers, as the Marxists and anthropologists say, and creators of symbolic culture. But we were not human until the appearance of the menstrual cycle. With it came the possibility of all evolutionary developments that are specifically human, like extraction of mental energy from reproduction and survival, social bonding through human emotion, symbolisms, and in parentheses it has symbols are mental children, recognition and valuing of the individual as a being with rights to pleasure and subjective exploration, social organization, and sexual affection, leading to the development of cultural and economic cooperation for the purpose of enhancing rather than just maintaining human experience. Otherwise, why evolve? Women have got to understand the importance of the switch from primate estrus to human menstrual cycle, because this was the mechanism of female evolution. It is also the target of patriarchy. Female sexuality and female evolution are, and have been for 2 or 3 millennia at least, in a lethal deadlock with patriarchal ideology, religious, economic, and political. This is because patriarchy as a system wants to enforce and maintain male primate power, dominance, control over our species. The rise of patriarchy was an evolutionary step backwards in this sense. The only thing blocking or neutralizing this patriarchal primate urge toward dominance control of the human species is the more advanced capacity for human creative communal process via social sexual bonding evolved by the women of our species, i.e., we are still trying to evolve from the primate to the fully human. And in this long attempt, autonomous female sexuality represents an advance, while patriarchal control over female sexual process represents regression. Damn, damn, damn. Wait, y'all. It's Ooh, I am resonating with everything tonight. I'm like, We are still trying to evolve from the primate to the fully human. And in this long attempt, autonomous female sexuality represents an advance, while patriarchal control over female sexual process represents regression. This is why all patriarchal religions try to define menstrual and childbirth blood, both the source of life, as a filth, a shame, a crime, because it represents the creative power of the evolutionary female. She who, that was in quotes, as Judy Grahn said, she who, with her blood, created the human world. She who, with her blood, created the human world. Next chapter, Moon and Womb. Womb. Getting good. I like it. Yeah, I like it. The ancient people believed, with their usual biological accuracy, that the moon mother created human society. If the moon were to vanish, all mental activity on earth would cease. In their languages, words for wisdom, knowledge, spirit, soul, and time are always cognate with words for the moon. In Dakotan, Wakan means spiritual, wonderful, and menstrual. Names for the goddess usually have their roots in words for womb and vulva. The original magic was always the woman's and was associated with the change of power or energy field at the time of the menstrual period. Period. The most ancient moon cults were menstrual cults. Menstrual blood is liquid flesh, both sacred and biological, i.e., it's magically powerful. Within it dwells the life spirit. So the ancients painted their dead in their womb like underground burial chambers with red ochre, the color of rebirth within the mother. The human womb is strongly supplied with conscious sensory nerves. It is it is a sense organ. It is a sense organ, complex, thin-walled, and raw like a wound. In second stage childbirth, it has a powerful 100-pound thrust. At menstruation, the inner skin is shed, and this was once to be similar to the shedding of the snake's skin and the eternal renewal of the moon out of herself. Women who were in especially strong resonance with the moon mind became shamans, oracular priestesses, witches. They were chosen by their group or were self chosen for their special psychic powers and divinations of the blood at their first menstruation. Shamanism, an ecstatic lunar technology, relies on the natural psychic descent into body consciousness that menstruation brings each month to women. Shamanistic states of possession are still practiced among North Pole Inuits, Native Americans, Siberians, the Sames of Lapland, and pagan people everywhere trying to revive the techniques. Shamanic possession and all ecstatic trances are hysteric states. Hysteria means womb. So the etymology they put in parentheses is, so it used to be hystera, which means womb consciousness. And hysteria is a hypersensitive state during which occult or transnatural phenomena occur. The apparent suspension of physical laws, as in fire walking, cuts that do not bleed, stigmata, suspended breathing, levitation, flying objects, etc. The suspension of physical law is apparent because in reality, such phenomena occur within physical law insofar as it can be manipulated or bent by a mind with the proper techniques. A part of this technique is a talent for ecstatic trance, in which very strange things happen and happen for all to see. In our society, this is called madness. In more sophisticated cultures, it was recognized as a fascinating skill. In any case, shamanic hysteria is a female womb state, just as the Delphic oracle and her python were named after the womb, Delphine. Okay, next chapter. Menstrual rites, rites and taboos. The first measure of time was menstrual time, and from this, women developed lunar calendars and ancient astrology. Colleges of women, moon colleges of Hera, the womb giver of laws. So, colleges of women were able to influence conception and birth through dream control. Communion with the body through dreams gave them self knowledge through the cycle. It is possible to have dream knowledge of conception, of pregnancy, before any physical signs appear. In the experience of one of the authors, within 2 to 3 days after intercourse, the body tells one in a dream that conception has occurred, along with the correct future sex of the fetus. It happened 3 out of 3 times. All this is chemical information which our brains as electrochemical information centers have access to. Translating chemical information into consciousness via dreams is a matter of receptivity and technique, a technique that ancient women surely practiced because it works. In The Wise Wound, Shuttle and Redgrove speculate that primal women might even have learned to menstruate from the new moon or dark moon. Further, that perhaps they used drugs that were not only mind expanders but also contained steroid substances related to the human sex hormone, a steroid that could abort the uterine lining. This giving women great sexual sensitivity and also independence from unwanted reproduction and from men. We do feel the lunar tides in our bodies, and the water in our bodies sees the moon as the crystalline structures of water. Um, Let me make sure I read that right. We do feel the lunar tides in our bodies, and the water in our bodies sees the moon as the crystalline structures of water alter or resonate with the moon passing overhead. Okay, I'm saying it one more time, okay, because it's missing me. All right, so we do feel the lunar tides in our bodies, right? And the water, just like the actual moon, the moon controls the tides of the ocean. We do feel the lunar tides in our bodies, and the water in our bodies sees the moon as it actually the water in our body actually sees the moon as the crystalline structures of water alter or resonate with the moon passing overhead. Got it. Women, unconditioned by pejorative patriarchal taboos against the menstrual cycle, were surely in fine tune with all its phases. They knew in their bodies and dreams the possibilities of the moon. To know something is to be it. We neglect her rights at our cost. We no longer contain our cycle. Under patriarchy, we are chained to it in fear, shame, annoyance, and under constant threat of unwanted pregnancy. Under patriarchy, menstruation is a punishment rather than a gift or like an advantage or a talent. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other Father God religions trace the evil of women to menstruation. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other Father God religions trace the evil of women to menstruation. Menstruation is the visible bloody sign of the serpent, of the devil, in the female body. Patriarchal ontology states that all evil flows from this original female evil, moon blood. Menstruation was seen by biblical men as the curse of God laid upon woman for her sin in Eden, and the curse it is called even today. The European Inquisition probed into women's blood cycle dream life and trance experiences, declaring that any woman possessed by a pythonic, meaning oracular or menstrual, spirit must burn. This idea also originates in the Bible. The Old Testament patriarchs quite intentionally set themselves against the lunar psyche in women and in men who are half female, in their desire to destroy the goddess religion and the goddess within us all. Because of this, the menstruating womb became the devil of patriarchy. The only good woman is a pregnant woman. etc. And the 300 plus years of European Christian witch hunting has been accurately called 9 million menstrual murders. Women were burned for practicing our natural moon crafts of midwifery, hypnotism, healing, dowsing, herbal and drug use, dream study, and sexual pleasure. Crafts that go back to the Stone Age and were passed down from mother to daughter for over 50,000 years. Women were burned for practicing our natural moon crafts of midwifery, hypnotism, healing, dowsing, herbal and drug use, dream study, and sexual pleasure. Crafts that go back to the Stone Age and were passed down from mother to daughter for over 50,000 years. Since this persecution, European women at least have suffered an extreme non alignment with their internal lunar processes. European and American women, however hard we try, rarely get back in touch with the lunar chemical information because we live in isolation from each other and the moon, in an environment hostile to the moon as anything but a rocket launch base or a gigantic neon billboard in the sky. Men in patriarchal societies learn or reveal a great jealousy and fear of natural women, of the sexual, mental, and spiritual abilities of fully evolved women living in harmony with the consciousness of our own bodies. The menstrual taboo is the consequence of this fear and resentment as they are projected back on women's lives. Under patriarchy, all life is dualized. Women also are dichotomized, cut in two. There is good little, oh, I'm sorry, there is the good little ovulating wife who is supposed to be passive and not very sexual. It's hard for even a woman to feel sexy cleaning the toilet bowl. And then there is the witch, the sex fiend, whore, scarlet woman. Read again, you heard that. And of active, dynamic menstrual sexuality. As both female cycles and the wise wound show, there are two poles of to women's sexuality. The pole of ovulation, which tends to express itself in terms of wanting to surrender, like its white, clear discharge is called the river of life, and it is acceptable in patriarchy because it is receptive and fertile, right? And then you have the pole of menstruation, before, during, and after ovulation, which expresses itself in wanting to take erotic initiative to capture and demand. Um, the red flow is called the river of death, and it's multi-orgasmic and aggressive sexuality is taboo in patriarchy. Okay, so let me say that again. So you have the one pole of ovulation, and you have the pole of menstruation, which is before, during, and after ovulation, all right, which expresses itself in wanting to take erotic initiative to capture and demand. Our menstrual sexuality, which is non fertile, so no, I'm sorry, and I said before, during, and after ovulation. I did not mean that. I'm sorry. Our menstrual sexuality, which is non fertile, is called masculine and castrating by Freudian types who share in the cultural fear of mature women. In early patriarchy and in some contemporary indigenous cultures that have been colonized by misogynist religions, the menstrual taboo is openly punitive. It codifies sexual hostility in societies where women are treated as currency in men's affairs. Under the menstrual taboos, women were to be punished for our powers, sexual, reproductive, and psychic powers. We were banished to the menstrual hut, called unclean and dangerous to the man and his laws and his gods. In some tribal communities, we were imprisoned in dark cages or rooms for months, for as long as 3 years with the first menstruation. In American Indian cultures, on the other hand, the menstruating woman is seen for what she is, a powerful life source. As Daughters of Copper Woman shows us, Native American women have worked to keep alive for generations their affirmative and celebratory customs surrounding female puberty, including years of physical training to make women strong in both body and mind. They did this despite constant opposition from Christian missionaries and preachers who always view women's blood customs as savage and satanic. Underneath the colonializing misogyny of Christianity and Islam, Black African women too have managed to keep alive ancient puberty and menstrual customs, which are energizing for women. Worldwide, much of women's sacred blood rites and magical instruments have simply been stolen by patriarchy, or, if not co opted, repressed. Male initiation rites can express an envy and awe of women as men cut or wound their penises in imitation of bleeding vaginas. Their rites reenact birth and menstruation, but they also symbolize a violent separation from women, earth, and the maternal, more a guilty theft than a true participation. As Margaret Mead and others have shown, the more warlike and authoritarian uh, a society is, the stronger is its menstrual taboo. In such societies, a paranoid emphasis is placed on women's corrupting and debilitating influence and men's need to overpower, dominate, and devalue her. Male training in aggression is linked with taboos for both men and boys against any knowledge of or contact with women's natural functions. It would seem that when there is no acknowledgement of women's bleeding, then there is instead a male acting out of ritual and violent bloodshed and war. Warlike, aggressive male societies are in rivalry with women over which sex sheds the most sacred blood. War is men's response to women's ability to give birth and menstruate. All three are blood shedding rituals. Women's blood rites give life, however, while men's bloody rituals give only death. That just blew my mind, guys. Hold on. Let me just take a moment to. War is men's response to women's ability to give birth and menstruate. All three are bloodshedding rituals. Women's blood rites give life, however, while men's bloody rituals give only death. To compensate for this, such authoritarian societies culturally repress and degrade women's blood functions while elevating murderous war to a holy act. The women's menstrual mysteries of inspiration become, in war god worshiping patriarchy, the mysteries of resisted knowledge, repression, madness. Patriarchal societies are founded upon a crime. Patriarchal societies are founded upon a crime. The crime is not the murder of the father, as Freud would have us believe. It is the rape and scorn of the mother. This is the unconscious horror that each girl child inherits. And unlike male castration anxiety, rape anxiety is all too often reinforced by the daily reality of the act and threat of rape. Now, in parentheses, it says men's so called fear of castration is simply a fear of losing command over women in patriarchal society, which equates domination of women with manhood. Come on, somebody. If Western males have any legitimate fear of castration, it derives from the act of circumcision, which is a terrible thing to inflict on a male infant. But this custom comes from the Father God of the Bible. It doesn't come from women or any great mother religion. So, living constantly under the steel roof of patriarchy's criminal misogyny, women are forced to bend to and accept, on pain of ever reverberating punishment and terror, men's paranoid projections. Women, as long as we fear punishment for our powers and as long as we are economically dependent on men, must accept that our bodies are unclean and deficient. Under patriarchy, the mother is feared and hated quite crazily, both for her power and her weakness. Everything a man cannot courageously accept about himself is projected onto his mother or his wife, or onto any random woman walking down the street. Until yesterday, women were policed by the professionals, also gynecologists and psychiatrists who acted as cultural reinforcers of the rules of femininity, who blamed our ills like menstrual depression and pain on our failure to be feminine. How many men have grown rich being in the business of telling women what we are supposed to be? Obviously, patriarchy wants us to be something that is not natural for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't become crazy and sick trying to achieve it. Obviously, patriarchy wants us to be something that is not natural for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't become crazy and sick trying to achieve it. Until yesterday, once a month, witches were given drugs and electroshock treatment by the modern Inquisition, members of the psychotherapeutic professions. Now, thanks to feminism and more women doctors, menstrual depression and pain, including the premenstrual syndrome, are being seriously studied and treated with intelligence and concern, not the traditional contempt. But we can't forget how many women just yesterday were thrown into psychiatric wards by husbands and physicians because our cultural menstrual taboos rendered everyone stupid about basic life functions. Okay, is it me or is she just they just snapping right now? Like this is the hardest I've seen them go thus far. Wait, let me just say it. Can I say it one more time? Because, but we can't forget how many women just yesterday were thrown into psychiatric wards by husbands and physicians because our cultural menstrual taboos rendered everyone stupid about basic life functions. Women must understand that the object of taboo is also the object of strong desire. Menstrual blood is a powerful sexual element, and ancient men responded to women's rhythms. But to unyielding, patriarchal man, whose entire self concept depends on the fact that he is not a woman, any primal response to women's blood and rhythms is frightening. He fears to lose control. He fears loss of his ego. He fears empathizing with a woman. He fears melting into the other in the sexual act. He has a lot of fears. He has a lot of fears. And so the heterosexual act inevitably becomes a reaction to fear. It becomes violation and rape. To repress his fears, he takes on military terminology. He sees himself invading the woman's body. She becomes his sexual victim, his prisoner of war, simply because she had sex with him, in parentheses, they say engaged in battle, or allowed herself to be invaded. He must treat her with contempt as he would treat any loser. Few men in patriarchy are perceptive enough to realize that they have themselves lost a great deal, including the pleasures of sex. Men have mutilated their own sexuality along with trying to mutilate a woman's. Ejaculation is not necessarily the same as orgasm. Reich was trying to investigate the difference between a genital reflex and a total mind body response. Ancient Taoist and Tantric teachings originating in Chinese and Indian matriarchies taught men sexual techniques that suited women. Ancient women had strong genital pride and knowledge and in no way envied, feared, or imitated men. Women were the initiators of sexual knowledge. Women's collectives, no doubt, at the time of their menstrual flows, withdrew from the men to meditate, to practice lesbian love, to commune with the goddess in body prayer. For women, there is no separation between sex and spirit. Patriarchy exists by demanding that sex and spirit be opposites and then repressing and punishing women for contradicting such a fiat. Even in the menstrual huts, a custom enforced and twisted by patriarchy, women could still gather together to to confirm their own identity to sing, and to tell stories. At least they knew that their menstrual uncleanness was a misogynistic taboo. But in female cycles, Weidiger makes it. I'm sorry, but in Female Cycles, that's a book. Paula Weidiger makes it very clear that in the modern Western world, because there are no outward ritual signs of the menstrual taboo, it is even more insidious and harmful to us women. At her first menstruation, the young modern girl is abandoned by her culture. She is made to feel that her body and its rhythms are a biological impediment to freedom and fun. I just want to stop there because I was so proud that I remember coming up and how when I first started my menstruation, it was not celebrated. But when my niece started her menstruation, it was a whole thing. It was a celebration. And my daughter actually um initiated this celebration, or else I wouldn't have, because I was still kind of stuck, in some older ways. But it was beautiful that we broke that cycle, and so my niece was able to, we did have a nice, very beautiful ritual for my niece at the beginning of her menstruation. Okay. But back to it. So, um, and where was I? Okay, so simply because so few men have mutilated their own sexuality. I said that already. Oh wow. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. But okay, so in Female Cycles, Paul Weidiger makes it very clear that in the modern Western world, because there are no outward ritual signs of the menstrual taboo, it is even more insidious and harmful to us women. At her first menstruation, the young modern girl is abandoned by her culture. She is made to feel that her body and its rhythms are a biological impediment to freedom and fun. The subliminal message she receives from her culture is that a properly functioning body is male and non cyclic. On the job, at school, also, work is defined as a male activity. If she wants to be equal at work, she must function like a male, i.e., non cyclically. All legal and cultural disputes about women being pregnant or nursing at work or nursing in public derive from the fact that all public space in the West is defined in terms of the non cyclic male body. Women cannot enter the workforce or enter public life unless they agree to act as though their bodies were functionally male also. To act as though one could function like a male is to suppress the fact that one is actually female. The minstrel hut is no longer to one side of the village. It is now constructed in women's own hearts and minds as a very secret place where we take care of all our female functions while trying to act as though they weren't happening. Mm, mm. The minstrel hut is no longer to one side of the village. It is now constructed in women's own hearts and minds as a very secret place where we take care of all our female functions while trying to act as though they weren't happening. When it comes to menstruation, we are female in secret, posing as male in public. In fact, with the popularity of panty shields, the entire cycle from ovulation discharge to menstrual blood can now be kept so discreet, i.e., hidden, that any woman can become vice president of IBM. In our secret hearts and minds, though, which are our menstrual huts, continues a very real fear of men's negative and punitive responses to menstruation to our whole female cycle. Female sex objects abound, but they are all man made. When is the last time you saw a centerfold with hairy armpits, hairy legs, and a blood flow? Come on, baby. What? Female sex objects abound, but they're all man made. When is the last time you saw a centerfold with hairy armpits, hairy legs, and a blood flow? Although we did just see, I saw Erica Badu when she was accepting some gift. I saw a picture of her and she raised her hand up and you could see like she raised her arm up and you saw all that arm. Yes, do it. She had all her hair all out there. There we go. The young girl of the modern West learns from all these subliminal signals to distrust, to dislike, and to be ashamed of her own body and feelings and those of other women. The femaleness she knows, body, hair, sweat, monthly blood flow, menstrual odor, ovulation, discharge, must be hidden, taken care of in secret, while the femaleness men want to see must be enhanced and publicly flaunted. Whether she really feels like doing this or not, she sees all the other women doing it. The message is that she must depend on something outside of herself, like men and male taste, for her self definition. And she is on her own, isolated. The modern community of women exists only to show her how to hide her femaleness. She comes crazily or with resignation to associate menstruation with hurts, wounds, body waste, disabilities, shame, curtailment of her freedom. She comes to believe her lack of freedom comes from nature, her own biology, rather than resulting directly from patriarchal oppression and male fear. And so, the menstrual taboo has been one of the most successful methods devised by men to undermine self acceptance, self understanding, and self confidence in women. It acts as a constant confirmation of a negative self image. Most complaints about the advertisement of personal products on television come from women. Unfortunately, their complaints are not directed at the commercial exploitation of women's bodies by male industries. No, women complain such ads are in bad taste. They do not want their shame, their secret femaleness discussed in public. Those ads belong in the minstrel hut. Only dependent motherhood is celebrated and recognized as legitimate in patriarchy, and sexuality is presented as reproduction or naughty sin rather than as profound emotional experience. Sexual passion is not seen as an attribute to femininity. The only way our culture can handle women's sexuality is in pornography, a male distortion that reveals patriarchal puritanism and fearful fastidiousness like a fun house mirror reveals your face. Women who cannot or will not accept the taboos are still punished, as we've been punished for 2,000 years in the patriarchal world as lesbians, unmarried mothers, thinkers, artists, witches. One form of punishment is culturally mandated rape, which is clearly increasing as women struggle for freedom. The message is clear. Only when we women give up our sexual autonomy and our right to be independent and creative, only when we give up ourselves and accept patriarchal male definitions of femininity as passive, negative, and receptive, only then will we be treated humanely. Only then will we be treated with patronizing smiles and door openings, something just a little less than the male. It is male fear, hatred, and envy that has for so long tried to turn our female abilities into incapacities. And despite all suave veneer of advanced Western culture, it is gut level male fear, hatred, and envy that women must fight to reverse this field. Sorry. Both female cycles and the wise womb speak at great length about the menstrual epidemic among modern civilized women. As much as 90% of all women suffer from some form of distress, like pain, cramps, or depression, in connection with menstruation. Severe cramping is now being treated as prostaglandins. I'm sorry. It's severe cramping is now being treated with prostaglandins. Some depression is related to menstrual edema, but depression is also anger toward turned inwards. Depression is also anger turned inwards or knowledge withheld. When violence is done to our nature, it talks back in irregular and disharmonious ways. The attempts at detaching oneself from it simply lead to the body language of illness. When we menstruate, we are more psychologically open and vulnerable, and because of this, more unable to accept injustices, deceits, and distortions. And so our stored up rage and sexual frustrations are likely to burst out at this time. Penelope Shuttle claims that painful bleeding, backache, and cramps can be relieved by orgasmic experience. But because of menstrual taboo and men's fear of women's blood, most heterosexual women are not able to live out their heightened and powerful menstrual sexuality. Hmm. The menstrual cycle deeply links body, soul, and mind, but traditionally, male doctors have viewed women as hormone robots. They have a hard time conceiving us as souls/minds. The menstrual tension is also caused by an increased need to dream and to meditate. This was the time, remember, when ancient women experienced prophetic dreams and went into trance states. This is the monthly transformation and rebirth of the ego self. Hmm. The wise wound talks of children's awareness of the mother's menstrual clock. The breath and taste of blood is our first experience at birth, and we can smell our mother's blood each month. We are aware of her unhappiness and frustration. Our children are aware of ours. Men are influenced from childhood by their mother's cycles. If menstruation were not a taboo but an open primary life experience for all people, we could all deal with it. Long overdue is research into male behavior and sexual attitudes to menstruation, menopause as well. It does no good to educate girls and boys about the clinical aspects of puberty, menstruation, sex, and reproduction while never tackling the psychological, cultural, and religious attitudes that make these natural experiences into such a problem for everyone. The very religions that have turned human sexuality into pathology and nightmare should not be allowed to determine how public school children learn about sex. Most of our American misogyny, especially ideas about menstrual uncleanness, comes from the Bible. For this reason alone, the Bible should be kept from public schools as a major source of the cultural defamation of women. Ouch. Surely the First Amendment should protect young girls from being told God made them to be unclean and in need of monthly purification. Ouch again. More study needs to be done also on the effects of more study needs to be done also on the effects of the birth control pill and IUDs on premenstrual symptoms and on cyclic experience in general. Now, remember, this book was written in 1984 because there has been more research done on these various things too. Um, it has been assumed that women will tolerate any menstrual upheaval in exchange for effective contraception. And in the short run, this might be true. We have yet to see the long term effects of reproductive technology on women's whole being, body, mind, and soul. Menopause is the end of the menstrual cycle. In patriarchal culture, it is also treated as the end of women's sexual identity. This reveals how totally female sexuality is equated with reproduction in the patriarchal primate brain and in opposition to the facts of female evolution. The menopausal woman is portrayed almost exclusively in Western culture as a sad, ridiculous, and powerless creature. This is not so in many other cultures, including Native American, Hindu, African, where the older woman is accorded great respect and actually comes into her own in middle age, enjoying maximum freedom, independence, authority, and community influence after her childbearing years are over. Again, there are three stages we talked about last in the last book reading, and just like the moon has the waxing, the waning, and the full moon. You have the maiden, the mother, and the crone. I'll just say I am so excited about the crone status because all of that life force, that lifeblood that was flowing out of you is retained and it's so magical. What do you think happens to us, baby? I'm so excited for my crone stage to come. I mean, not that excited. I mean, but I'm excited. I don't look at menopause as like negative at all. I'm very excited about it. Whenever it decides it's gonna come. With feminism, European and American postmenopausal women are also enjoying a renaissance of sorts, starting new occupations, returning to school, traveling, and experimenting with non traditional lifestyles. Hey, hey. That's me. Whether the reawakening and enjoyment of new powers extends to her sex life, however, the contradiction in our culture is that women are seen by men as sexually attractive when young and fertile, precisely during the years when we are menstruating, and also seen as sexually dangerous. Women must, however, not show any disturbing signs of that menstruation or cyclicity. We are taught that we are our reproductive functions and that we are valuable only as long as we can reproduce. All the suppressed fear and envy of women that men feel for us during our fertile years is let loose in the form of male mockery and outright hatred of older women. Men of middle age, on the contrary, are often at the peak of their professional, economic, and cultural powers. Sexually, they are much less empowered than middle aged women, and often they attempt to mask this by becoming even more insufferably egotistical and dominant. Or with their cultural and economic empowerment, they buy younger women or a younger wife. It is not that the postmenopausal woman has become less sexual, the opposite is true, but that men lose their sexual interest in her. One reason being that male sexuality is still primate sexuality, and primate sexuality is obsessively reproductive. Dominating fertile females is the badge of macho primatehood. Traditionally, older women have ended up pretending they have no sexuality. They have become sexually invisible or culturally sexless. Recently, also with feminism and the discovery that older women can be very interesting people, it has become trendy, if not always acceptable on Main Street, for older women to be coupled with younger men. This is a very ancient pagan situation and good for us. Another option is a lesbian relation and a long term relation with another woman. This is another pagan solution, always subliminal in Western culture. With current life expectancy, the average woman in the West has about 25 sexual active years in front of her after the decay of the ovaries and the ending of the fertility cycle. Women and society must adjust to this. We cannot go back to spending 1/4 of our lives, perhaps the sexiest times of our lives. Let me say that again. We cannot go back to spending 1/4 of our lives, perhaps the sexiest time of our lives, as asexual zombies. Our culture, if it is to be ours, will also have to begin adjusting, responding positively to women's monthly rhythms and sexual and emotional changes. The whole range of female being and potential. For this to happen, of course, we women must utterly transform life and society to be able once again to tune in to the goddess within us. Such a transformation will have to be genuinely bloody. It must affirm women's blood. All right, another chapter. We're at the original woman, witch, rebel, midwife, and healer. The original woman, witch, rebel, midwife, and healer. What would it have been like if patriarchy had never happened? To get an idea, we have to comprehend the first law of matriarchy. Women control our own bodies. That's the first law. This would seem a basic premise of any fully evolved human culture, which is why primate patriarchy is based on its denial. Children were generally welcome in matrifocal society as there was enough food for all, and children could help in agricultural and craft work. When childbearing is not a punishment but self chosen, and when raising children is not an economic survival disaster, most of us enjoy being around children. Most men do too. In pre patriarchal cultures, children were raised communally, not closed up within four nuclear walls, not as property, but as the fruit of all. Most of all, childbearing and child raising were a part of each woman's life. a nourishing as well as nurturing part, but not her whole life. When women control our bodies, our daily lives, our environment, and our goals, we don't inflict on ourselves the terrible split between motherhood and self realization that patriarchy and the nuclear family inflict on us. This split is a structural one, indigenous to male dominated environments. In matriarchy, women could be mothers and also enjoy other energies and interests. Men who envied women, our capacity to bear children and also do other things, turned around and invented patriarchy, in which motherhood is structured as an all consuming burden. Men knew they could never bear children, but they could try to keep us from doing anything else. But women don't always want children for a multitude of reasons best determined by women. So, in matristic cultures, there were a number of magic rites and techniques in use that contributed to fertility control. Women always had knowledge of herbal contraceptives and abortifacs, as well as narcotics and muscle relaxants like raspberry tea that could ease childbirth. When women are in natural control of our own fertility, population is always kept in practical relation to the needs of the group and the abundance of the environment. That, after all, is what it's all about. Since time immemorial, since the beginning of human time, the arts of gynecology, midwifery, and holistic herbal healing, including birth control, were wholly female domains, guarded by the Neanderthal women, the Cro Magnon women, the Neolithic women, and priestesses of the great goddess. Contraception and abortion can become illegal only when, in patriarchal class society, church and state define it so for their own purposes. And what are their purposes? Large populations that drive the wages and value of labor down, masses of people kept in ignorance and wretchedness, out of which come male cannon fodder and female prostitutes and brood mares to service their wars. Patriarchy is based on cynical male control of female reproduction, and the resultant ugliness of such a culture is there for all to see. When women practice their own medicine, thus controlling their own bodies, such a state could not come into existence. One of the major weapons of patriarchy was the establishment of a closed male medical profession that barred women from practicing their ancient herbal medicine and gynecological skills. In medieval Europe, this elite male medical profession was the joint creation of the royal courts and the Christian church, which joined together to create the European court state as the political machinery to break the power of the people on the land, the peasants, the pagans, the people of the witches. Because women value the quality of life experienced by their children, women throughout history have done what they could do to keep population in balance with environment. Herbal and mechanical contraceptions is one method, abortion has been another. Tribal women throughout the world nurse their babies for 4 years, and during this time might have no sexual relations with the man, using such means to space out children. Tribal women averaged 4 children in their reproductive lifetimes, each child receiving the maximum of intense maternal, physical, and emotional care during the critical early years. No method is ideal. Some are extreme, but when contraception and abortion are not practiced, the results are even more extreme. Infanticide, malnutrition, infant starvation deaths, mass famine. No woman making her own choices would deliberately bear children only to see them starve to death. Among people practicing abortion, even infanticide, the spirit of the dead child was returned to the earth womb to await new birth, partaking still in the substance of the Great Mother. It was not lost, but the well being of the living group was maintained. Patriarchy arose among cattle breeders who had discovered the male role in conception. They believed that the entire life force in males was in male semen. Now, they believed that the entire life force was in male semen, and that the female womb served only as a vessel for the male seed, which was elevated into the Father God. So, among Near Eastern Father God religions, the child had value only as proof of male potency, and only insofar as it had been given into its ideological power. Catholics Catholics and fundamentalist Protestants believe that children dying without baptism into their religions have no souls and no salvation. The unbaptized dead infant remains forever in limbo. In the past, Semitic Jewish or Muslim children who died without being named, circumcised, or otherwise ritually recognized by the fathers were buried or burnt without ceremony, i.e., i.e., these children had identity only as the father's property. Today, the Catholic Church maintains that humans, including fetuses, receive life entirely from God the Father. The 10 months of biological labor put into this child by the mother mean nothing. She is just a vessel. Pope Paul VI announced in 1972 that no woman has the right to abortion, even if her life depends on it, even if she has other children who might need her, even if she is a fully grown, conscious human being who might desire to live. He was thereby claiming that the fetus, always considered potentially male, is more sacred than the human mother who bears it within her body. Why? She is only female, but the fetus comes from God, the big bull stud in the sky. In March 1984, a pregnant Irish woman in Dundalk died from a recurrence of cancer, surrounded by Catholic doctors who refused to give her any treatment for fear of damaging the fetus. At the time of her death, she had tumors on her legs, neck, and spine, but the doctors had refused to x ray her, refused to give her any painkillers, refused all treatment absolutely. She died 2 days after delivering a premature baby who died at birth. Can we really believe that celibate priests care so much about the lives of infants? Or is it that their true concern is to maintain absolute control over the bodies of women, since it is upon this control that their entire religion is based? Feminists say if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Women must understand that because men cannot get pregnant, their next move is to establish patriarchal religion, whose major sacrament. Women must understand that because men cannot get pregnant, their next move is to establish patriarchal religion, whose major sacrament is to make childbearing a punishment for sex, a punishment for being female. Certainly, it was not so in ancient matriarchies. The earliest recorded abortion recipes yet found date from circa 2700 BC. They were inscribed on Egyptian papyrus scrolls. From Egypt come the first known medical texts also, and among them were prescriptions for contraceptive substances meant to be inserted into the vagina. Very likely they knew of temporarily sterilizing herbal potions that women could take. After all, the hormone progesterone, now used in the birth control pill, exists naturally in various plants. Today's multi-billion-dollar birth control industry was originally built on two yam roots found in Mexico. The Talmudic Jews invented the vaginal sponge, which was in use, soaked in oil until the invention of the Dutch cap by a woman doctor in Holland in the 1880s. Pessary means stone. Oriental farmers and travelers knew that if a small object like a stone was inserted into the womb of a female camel or other domestic animal, she would not conceive. Native healers on Java traditionally inserted a small object into the wombs of women for the same purposes. Think of it as the original IUD. In ancient Rome and Greece, vinegar or lemon juice were used as acid spermicides, and one half of a squeezed out lemon is a pretty good cap. Native American women knew plants and root concoctions to take for temporary sterility, for abortion, as well as childbirth ease. All African and worldwide Aboriginal people the same. It would seem that at no time in history have women been so totally oppressed in their sexuality, kept so ignorant of contraceptive methods while forced into compulsory and yearly childbearing as in the so called civilized societies of the Christian West. As Dr. Margaret Murray pointed out in the 1930s, modern ideas of the witch are based entirely on Inquisition trial records of the 16th to the 18th centuries when the European Christian church was totally mobilized to crush out the remains of Western paganism. The stereotype was eagerly reinforced by the European medical professions who saw the witches, who were just herbal healers and midwives, as economic rivals. The stereotype was eagerly reinforced by the European medical professions who saw the witches, who were herbal healers and midwives, as economic rivals. Before these wholesale purges and repressions, many of the great early European doctors of medicine and pharmacology, like Pericles, like Pericles, claimed openly that they had learned all they knew of healing and drugs directly from women's witchcraft. The Wiccan, which means wise women, the Wiccan or wise women practiced the ancient Dianic religion and functioned as midwives and healers to the common people and the peasantry. Throughout the European countryside, the sage femme was called in at childbirth. These women were highly skilled. It is on record that some could perform cesarean sections with complete success for the mother and child. But during the late Middle Ages, dominated by the Christian Inquisition, the delivery of a pregnant woman was no longer considered a sacrament, but a dirty business. And the women who attended the poor at childbirth were frequently considered social outcasts or worse. They were charged with witchcraft, tortured, and burned. One witch was burned alive in Scotland for the sole crime of bathing some neighborhood children for hygienic reasons in the midst of an epidemic. Healthcare and healing was publicly discouraged by the Christian church, which officially believed that life was supposed to be diseased, wretched, and painful. This was God's will as punishment for human sin. People who tried to alleviate suffering or cure illness, especially through ancient folk and herbal medicine or simple hygiene, was suspected to be agents of the devil. Think back to that number 9 million so called witches were burned during the Inquisition periods. In Egypt, circa 3000 BC, both female and male priest doctors had helped women in childbirth. But in medieval Europe, midwifery was considered a crime for men and probably a sign of witchcraft for women. The witch hunts coincided with the rise of a specialist male medical profession and were instigated by celibate monks whose minds were inflamed with the most psychotic sexual hatred of women. During the early Renaissance, medicine claimed to be more scientific, a new male profession, subject to government and professional control. Eventually, these male professionals discovered the gold mine of obstetrics. Even midwifery began to be surrounded by educational requirements from which women were excluded. Male midwives appeared in Europe, and doctors insisted on being consulted during childbirth. These were the same professional medics who later demanded that laboring women enter hospital wards and then moved from corpse autopsies to childbirth beds, spreading infection to women and causing higher mother mortality rates than had ever existed in pagan Europe. Y'all, this really happened. Okay, well, do I say this really happened? What I mean is there's so much backup. There's so much. I'm just showing you right now, like all of the sources that are cited concerning this shit. This shit really it's been documented, shall I say. I wasn't there. But come on. Okay. So I just let me just, I gotta eventually these male professionals discovered the gold mine of obstetrics. Even midwifery began to be surrounded by education requirements from which women were excluded. Male midwives appeared in Europe, and doctors insisted on being consulted during childbirth. Now, these were the same professional medics who later demanded that laboring women enter hospital wards and then moved from corpse autopsies to childbirth beds, spreading infection to women and causing higher mother mortality rates than had ever existed in pagan Europe. The modern male medical professions rose on the ashes of the burnt witches. These women were vilified in every way that clerical tongue or pen or torture instrument could inflict, and luridly accused of everything, of making men both lustful and impotent, of helping women in labor, and depopulating. Wait a minute, y'all. I'm gonna start over. Let me just. The modern male medical professions rose on the ashes of the burnt witches. These women were vilified in every way that clerical tongue or pen or torture instrument could inflict, and luridly accused of everything, of making men both lustful and impotent, of helping women in labor, and of depopulating Christendom by strangling newborn babies. In 1486, it was officially declared that no one does more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives. And there was truth in this accusation. European women living in wretched poverty and I'm sorry, European women living in wretched poverty and condemned to unending pregnancy by the church's celibate male priesthood had no greater friends than the sage femmes, the wise women midwives who told them how to prevent contraception, what herbs to use for abortion, and how to ease labor pain. As the church rightly suspected, the midwives also often neglected to properly baptize the newborn into the Christian faith. All this gave women a certain autonomy and control over their own bodies, and this power threatened the power of the male priests, the father church, and father state. Midwives were witches, and witchcraft was high treason against God's nouveau male majesty. The Christian male hierarchy, both Catholic and Protestant, which was developing during this time, was intent on establishing total domination over the innermost thoughts of the European people. The Inquisition was the instrument of this domination. Witches were independent of mind, they were of the people, and they served the goddess, the native goddess of Neolithic Europe, not a male god imposed by Roman imperialism. Their covens were correctly suspected to be meeting places for revolutionary peasants. Joan of Arc was legendarily a member of a witch coven. In every small village or city neighborhood, the witch was the spiritual and political rival of the local priest and the imperial church. She offered real healing through anciently tested herbal knowledge, while the priest could only give slogans promising relief in heaven or punishment in hell. Medieval Christianity taught that this world was the devil's excrement, our flesh the home of original sin, and our lives an evil to be despised and endured. With the church's disruption of the old ways, human life in Europe was indeed becoming quite ugly. Countering this, the witch kept alive the ancient pagan nature wisdom and cyclic rhythms, dances, songs, beliefs, lore, and skills celebrating the sacredness of life and the ecstasy of the earth. The people followed the witches who always had better music and more delight. The Hebrew God Yahweh in Genesis 3:16 had condemned Eve for her disobedience. Quote, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt you bring forth children. Unquote. And so, according to the church, it should be. To the male priesthood and celibate monks, woman alone was sexual. Her genitals were fearsome and unclean, and childbirth was disgusting and unholy. To Christian clerics, original sin adhered intrinsically to orgasmic experience, to the fact of female genitalia. Children were born dirty as a result of the dirt of sexual conception. Now, in parentheses, they say testament, on the other hand, comes from the Latin testes or testicle, meaning male witness. Okay. In Childbirth Without Fear, written in 1942 by Dr. Grantley Dick Reed, declares that there can be no more horrible stigma upon our civilization than the history of childbirth. Long after anesthetics were medically available and as late as the mid 19th century, the clerical and medical authorities opposed any methods that might relieve women's suffering during labor. Women were meant to suffer greatly as God's punishment for our collective sin. Witches were accused and arrested and tortured and burned for the crime of helping women in labor with herbs and muscle relaxing techniques. Such womanly help was a dreadful and impious act against the will of God. And as Martin Luther, founder of Protestantism, stated, if a woman grows weary and at last dies from childbearing, it matters not. Let her die from bearing. She is there to do it. In ancient society and among primitive people, still, laboring women sit in a squatting position, actively in charge of the body's creative work. In the modern West, until yesterday, the Christian tradition of passive suffering prevailed in the labor room. The woman lying on her back, usually strapped down in cruelly impersonal hospital environments, while a male doctor delivered her child. Woman bears the pain, but man takes the credit for deliverance. We now know that this strapped down, legs in stirrups position was the invention of French King Louis, who mandated it throughout his kingdom because he was royally turned on by watching women in labor. With feminism and women's rediscovery of home birth, midwifery, and drug free delivery, this situation has, in the past decade, radically changed. As recently as 1971, midwifery and home birth were virtually illegal and or practically unobtainable in almost all American states. Now, women have heroically revived the occupation of midwife, established comfortable birthing centers, and forced hospitals to compete by offering women more comfort and autonomy in hospital delivery wards. Woo woo! I keep seeing the word midwife as I've been accepted into the University of um, the College of Midwives in Utah. So I'm very excited because I am definitely on the track to become a midwife. Though midwifery and home birth have been common practices in 20th century Western Europe, the American medical profession fought them vigorously, perhaps accounting for the fact that America in the recent past ranked 17th in newborn mortality rates among the Western nations. American women's successful fight so far to return childbirth to mother and child is reversing this statistic and also helping to re empower women on the most basic level of becoming acquainted with our own bodies. One giant step toward womankind. During the time of Catholic dominated Europe, it was also a crime against God to miscarry. Even if a woman miscarried after an accident or after being beaten by her husband, she could still be put to death for her sin against the Father because all miscarriages were suspected by the clergy of being intentional abortions. The celibate clergy always tended to believe women were guilty until proven dead. When Spanish Catholics colonized the American West, forcibly missionizing the Western tribes, it was the custom for Native American women who miscarried for any reason to be punished by being whipped and publicly humiliated for their sin before the church door. It was believed, sometimes correctly, that Indian women would practice abortion in order to rob the church of an Indian slave labor, and the priest of God could not allow this. The same mentality was practiced against European women for centuries by the Father Church, who, wherever male religious and political systems are based on the control of women's reproduction, women must live like this. According to the Bible, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That was Samuel 15:23. All those who follow the ancient and original religion, refusing to be dominated and dichotomized by Father God ideology, are defined as evil rebels belonging to the devil and are to be put to death according to God's will. In the Bible, for the first time, we see God's will, i.e., the male primate will to control female reproduction, used as a political tool to crush believers of other religions, women's religions. The fanatic misogyny of both Christianity and Islam originated, as did both these religions, in the Bible. Or, as women of the women's movement of the 1970s said, you are a witch by being female, untamed, angry, joyous, and immortal. The Wiccan nature, or witchcraft, is the original nature of all women, deriving from our primary biological experience, our psychic relationship with the earth and cosmos. It is this experience, this relationship, that patriarchy sets out to destroy. But women cannot change our nature. We can only try to forget it, repress it, or follow it under constant threat of punishment by the dominating male order. About a modern day African witch, it is said if she is lucky enough that her psychic powers are quiescent, then she can live a normal life. There is a constant fear among her husband's relatives that she will use her powers to revenge her humiliating situation as wife, isolated as she is among hostile strangers in the patriarchal land and the patriarchal family, removed by patrilocal custom from her own maternal kin group. With quiescent psychic powers, of course, any woman's normal life is one of submission. In parts of the west coast of Africa, tribes remained matriarchal until well into the 10th century. When forced into patriarchal organization from the outside through Islamic invasion, many African women chose to run away with Muslim slave traders rather than become wives. So the witch alive under patriarchy is always under suspicion for having caused the sterility of her husband, or death, disease, and bad luck among her in laws, or bad weather or bad crops. Or in more fundamentalist situations, she is always under suspicion as a willful seductress of good men, a tool of evil nature, or the devil, designed by death and darkness to undermine and destroy what men call their civilization. Her genuine range and depth of creative powers are denied or forbidden. She lives in a man made situation where she can use only her negative powers, and for that she is punished and damned. Damn! Patriarchy sets her up as the universal scapegoat for all problems, imagined or real, thus removing from all men in her vicinity the terrible burden of thought. During the 500 years of Inquisition, representing the triumph of Christian imperialism over pagan Europe, a woman could either become a totally subservient wife, beaten and bullied by her husband, her eyes to the ground as the priests and preachers condemned and blamed her sex for all things, or she could stand straight, proud in her own woman wisdom, and then be burnt as a witch. That's on that note, that is the that's the end of that chapter. And we are the next chapter is entitled Goddess of the Witches, but it is 10:22. I think that is a great stopping place.